your primary area of research these days?
Yes, that's one area I'm interested in.
Okay. Would you say is you have one primary project going on in this area, or you sort of a number?
No, I mean really what I'm interested in is the nervous system as a whole, the brain as a whole. I just tend to concentrate on the visual system because more is known about it. But I don't feel I'm restricted to it, or even that I do any one particular thing in it.
Sort of studying that as a whole.
Well, what usually happens is one studying something and then has an idea about something else.
I see. So
then you follow that. So,
like REM sleep, for example.
Yes, that's right. That sort of thing. So, at the moment, I don't think I'm doing anything which is particularly concerned with vision as such. Mm-hmm. But of course, one is constantly aware of what other people are doing.
Right. So you're using that sort of as a window to some underlying processes.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you're looking for, say, using vision as a tool then?
Well, the main problem in vision probably is how to relate the different visual areas in the brain to the operations we must perform in order to see, and that's, in other words, we see in colour and we see in depth and we see movement and so on. And the whole business takes a lot of what loosely might be called computation, and the hope is to try and relate that to what neurons are doing in the head and how they're connected. But I can't say it's got anything much in the way of striking results.
Okay.
It's more, I would say, exploratory work, and mostly done by other people. I just sort of learn about what they do.
I see. So are you sort of looking over a number of researchers then? And
well, yes. I mean, just I go to meetings or talk to people, or go to seminars or something like that. And so I may find myself going off, as you implied, by some interest in sleep, or I may find myself looking into the theory of how sets of nerves interact with each other, or wondering how many different cell types there are in the cortex. Those are sort of some of the things. And they all seem very separate, but they all relate to the basic problem, and they all happen to be something that I've had some ideas about. Otherwise I go down learning things and hope I will collect some more ideas. So I don't have a narrowly defined topic or project, I would say. I usually have 2 or 3 things going along the lines we've mentioned.
Right. Okay. I have heard it said that you would consider yourself a theorist as opposed to a scientist.
As opposed to an experimentalist.
As opposed to an experimentalist.
Okay. Proper thing.
Could you define the two for me, and why are you the former?
A theorist, I would have thought it's obvious. A man who does mathematics is more normally a theorist. An experimentalist, a man who sits at the bench and works with animals or chemicals or whatever it is.
Okay. So
I mean, I wouldn't like to say there's a clear-cut distinction. There might be some activities that fall, but usually it's pretty clear what you're doing. Okay. If you're doing what's written on the board, that's really theory.
Okay.
And I think the real point isn't that. The real point is not the distinction between doing some theoretical work and some experimental work, which is usually pretty clear, but the fact that some people do both and some people do mainly one or mainly the other.
Okay.
It depends whether in some subjects it's difficult to combine the two because the theory is difficult and it's a full-time job, and the experiments need a whole new different set of skills, shall we say. So you tend to find one lot of people doing one and one another. That's particularly true in physics, but even in physics there were people who produced, very important new ideas and theories, and also did experiments. In neurobiology, I would say it's mostly experimental.
Okay. This is a little on the vague side. I don't know if you will care to take a stab at this, but if you were to say what is the goal of science, what is the goal of research, sort of a global sense.
Science as a whole, you mean?
So how about the role of the scientist?
Well, that's quite a different matter, because you have to first of all say what he does in science. I would have thought that he might have other roles as well. Are you a scientist?
No, sir, I'm a student.
But are you a student in some scientific
Oh, yes, I'm a
subject?
medical student.
Oh, you're a medical student, I see.
Applied sciences.
Well, I mean, the role of science is to understand the world we see about us. I mean, by a particular sort of approach, which consists of observing things, measuring things, and forming ideas, which are then tested, and so on and so on and so on. You know, there's a whole literature about what science is about. What are you going to contrast it with? It's different from...
Oh, say an artistic way of viewing the world.
Yes, well, the point about an artistic way is it doesn't express itself as testable hypotheses in the ordinary way, and more, it's often more personal. And obviously, they have some elements in common. The way you do science is something like an artistic activity. But it does seem to me that took something like a piece of music or a play. It's very different from all this stuff you have in these journals.
Okay.
I don't mean, doctors worry about things like, is medicine an art or a science? At least they used to. But they've given up worrying now.
Deciding it is the science.
Well, it's based on science, but the practice is something of an art, it seems to me.
Certainly both are involved.
Yeah, so I don't see this. I think you can ask interesting questions, more precise questions in medicine by saying, will medicine be less of an art if we, as we know more, and perhaps use computers to help us make diagnoses or something? Because that's where the art was mainly supposed to be.
Yes.
Apart from the business of just making the patient happy, you know, so he trusted you and all that kind of thing. What was thought to be the art in medicine was the art of being able to diagnose and from the various symptoms and so on. Nowadays the tests get more, the physician will call on, get more complex and science-based, and there's a beginning, but I don't know much about it, of trying to write computer programs so they will help you with the diagnosis. They won't necessarily do the diagnosis. As I understand it, the most interesting development there is that the computer doesn't give you the diagnosis, which after all he does from his past experience of God, but he tells you why. The computer tells you why it gave you the diagnosis, and that makes an enormous, makes you understand what's going on. It means you can ask for further tests or more things. You see what the computer. But I don't know how the score is, in the sense that I don't know when anybody's had a marathon, had a competition between 10 physicians and a computer to see. But I've no doubt it will come. I mean, they have computers playing chess against chess champions.
Right. Well, I think there's a tremendous resistance among physicians to computers.
Of course, because it take away the mystique of their profession.
So I take it then you see an increasing use of computers in medicine.
I'm sure it will be increasingly used, but what the limitations of it are, I wouldn't like to say until they've tried it. But people have been confident about the limitations of computers, but they get better programmed and faster. I mean, already the computer became a backgammon champion, admittedly partly by luck. We beat the man who just won the championship.
I understand it's taken the checkers championship as well.
Oh, that's easy. That would be the easiest thing in the world to do. But the chess one is getting. The point is that people use different strategies compared with the straightforward ones you use in chess. And in medicine, I don't think it's really clear what strategies they use. Anyway, the aim of the computer is not to replace the physician, but to help him. And whether that means that the physician becomes less experienced, so it's in very difficult cases he won't be able to solve them anymore, I don't know. Try it on your colleagues.
The reaction tends to be that's impossible. There's too many thought processes which go on which we're not aware of. it would be hard to program that into a computer.
Oh, that's what they say, but that's just a cop-out. How do they know that? How do they know you can't? After all, if one person spends a year or two analysing one particular case and trying to find what his thought processes are and so on, let's put in a program that's available to everybody. Whereas otherwise everybody's got to learn it by a method they don't understand.
Right.
So I think I would beware of such a thing. Anyhow, the point is these programs, these facilities I think now exist, at least in limited areas, and the real thing would be to test them.
And the day will come.
Well, I'm surprised I haven't tried it already, but I suppose the people who are doing it get so much opposition anyway, and probably they don't feel great competence yet in their programs that they haven't wanted to put it on. But I mean, if it comes to that, I don't suppose anybody's done an age test for physicians, have they?
An age test?
Well, take ones at 25, 35, 45,
see where the
55 and 65 and see which of them makes the best diagnosis.
Oh, yeah.
But why
I think
not?
that sort of objectivity frightens physicians, possibly.
Yes, but it's most interesting for medical education, as it may well show their medical education of the older ones is grossly out of date. They want to go back to school.
Maybe some people don't want to find that out.
Once you've got your medical degree, you can afford to be a bit more aggressive about
I'll
these
rock the
things.
boat in a couple of years after they've given me the EMD.
That's right.
I'm still treading very lightly in the school. I was curious if you would care to make a prediction. In the biological sciences, there have been tremendous explosive areas recently in, say, immunology, recombinant DNA. What might the new hot area be?
Well, I don't know anybody can tell what a hot area is till it develops, you know. And I don't know that I know one that's just around the corner. I mean, you take those two things, but if you go back a few years, or a year or two just before they happen, not many people would have predicted them.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to come up rather rapidly.
As a result of a sudden breakthrough?
Yeah, some new technique or some realization, put two techniques together or something. It isn't all that but in the sense that it's overnight, but it may take a couple of steps, 2 or 3 steps. No, I wouldn't like to say one. It has to, you see, the point is that in all these things, relatively steady, though not perhaps large progress is always being made on most fields. And it's only if the thing is unexpected that it's seen as a breakthrough.
I see.
And that you ask one to guess something that's unexpected.
Right.
Well, you have to be jolly, you have to be just at the beginning of it to see that. When I came here in '76, monoclonal antibodies were just starting. I'd been to the first seminar, the very first seminar, the very first monoclonal antibody. But I don't know one was fully aware of that for about another year when one suddenly, one realized. I suppose one might have done.
Right.
But so once you can see a powerful technique, you can see, as in monoclonal antibodies, it will be widely used. But then it's only about a year or so before everybody's seen it. And then it's gone away. You say, well, perhaps it takes 2 years, not more than that. And do we have any very new techniques or new ideas which are just in that initial stage? I don't think so. I think you have one. I wouldn't. Anyhow, if there is one, I don't know. I'm not smart enough.
I won't
to
put you
spot
on
it.
record. Okay.
Put it that way.
Might it be dependent on a technological breakthrough that would sort of an information gathering?
Oh, it's almost
method?
always a new theory or idea or a technological breakthrough. Otherwise, why should it,
Right.
what changes?
Okay.
You see, I suppose the other alternative is a radically new observation, but it must be something of that sort or a combination of them. Well,
Okay, well,
and then there are ones which are new, but they're not what they sound to be, like brain transplants. People start, no, really, you can transplant bits of one brain from one animal to another because then they'd get rejected by the immune system. So you can use this as a sort of way of drug therapy. So people are doing this on rats and mice, and they're just starting on humans. But it doesn't mean they're going to transfer their thoughts. It's going to transfer something more like, loosely speaking, like their moods or something of that sort. Okay. Their general behavior.
You said you came to San Diego in 1976?
We, of course, used to come here since this place was founded in the winter. But we came on sabbatical in 76 and then stayed, yes.
I see. Why did you choose to come to San Diego?
Well, because I was one of the original non-resident fellows at the Salk Institute. So when I wanted to come on a sabbatical, it was a natural place to come. I wasn't a non-resident fellow anymore. I'd done 12 years of it. But I had so many friends here, so that's why. I used to come every winter for a week or two, when in January or February, and they had an annual meeting. So I knew the area and the people and so on. So that was
Turns out your friends and coworkers tended to be here?
Well, I wouldn't say that because one has because so many people, Americans, visit us in Cambridge and want to travel so widely that one has friends and co-workers in many places, both in California and on the East Coast. And I mean, I don't think they were specially centered here, except possibly, yes, there was a difference, I think, that one simply knew a higher percentage of people who were there, you see, rather than, yeah.
Okay. One thing that I have heard that has puzzled me is I've heard repeatedly, I read articles, your name has come up and the phrase Sir Francis has been there.
No,
I know that's not
quite
correct.
wrong. Yeah.
Why the confusion? Do you have any
I
idea?
don't know. Yes, well, at least two sources started it. One is the University of Washington Press, for some reason, at one stage labelled me that way. And then this institute, one stage as a joke, labelled me when we were staying at the hotel, the Old Del Charo. So that sort of began it.
I see.
I don't know why, it's just sort of endemic. It's partly Sir Francis Drake. I think it's sort of the same, and they think it's much worse not to call you sir if you are sir than the other way round. So if they go to sort of hedge their bets, you see, sometimes they don't check. Sometimes it goes up on the posters. And sometimes they take it out. Sometimes they don't go with it. But my secretary is supposed to warn them. I don't know if she always remembers nowadays, because it's such the number of sort of routine things that one wants to do, and that's one of them.
You're something of a celebrity in the scientific community, and is that a hindrance to what you'd like to do, or are you aware of that? What's your feeling about that?
Well, shall we say it's a great help when you go into a new field, because then people are much more willing to talk to you and help you and sort of put up with your visits than they would if you were somebody, who was totally unknown. One tries not to trade on that by making sure if you go and visit someone that you know something about their subject before you go, so it isn't too much of a burden for them. It would be burdensome if I accepted all the invitations I get to come and give lectures and different things, but then I don't. So I've reduced that burden to a minimum. And also, although it's been a bit late now, but up to 10 or so years ago anyway, I was at pains to try and reduce my public exposure as much as possible. So it's not as bad as it might have been. For example, I'm very reluctant to appear on television and things of that sort, though I occasionally get my arm twisted to do it and so on. And for years I would never let my photo appear in textbooks, for example. I expected they could put them now without asking me. So at least one wasn't recognised everywhere, which I find rather annoying. So I can't say it can be a minor nuisance at times, but it isn't a serious. And also because I'm not very keen on taking part in public life, which I don't think I'm very good at. So I'm not under any particular I don't have any particular reason to get more publicity, shall we say. We could hardly have got more if we'd employed a publicity agent. I mean, it's incredible.
Has that been surprising to you?
See, well, yes. I mean, the thing I did try was to stop Jim Rotson writing his book, but that turned out to be impossible because I realised it would lead just to this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So personally, no. Personally, I've been able to keep them to within reason, anyway. So.
I imagine that when the history books are written, the primary thing your name will appear in relation to will be the elucidation of the structure of DNA.
Inevitably, I think, yes.
Yes. How do you feel about that?
Well, how do I feel about what?
I guess about the way your name is forever linked to the double helix.
Oh, I don't mind. It doesn't bother me one way or the other, actually. It's a bit embarrassing just recently because people will do silly things like celebrating the 30th anniversary and nonsense of that sort, you know. But again, well, that's a good example. You see, I had a meeting in England, in Cambridge, to celebrate the 30th anniversary. I was just damned if I was going to. Jim Watson stood in for us both. And so, well, I got used to the idea. I mean, it was nice, I suppose, at the beginning, but now it isn't an embarrassment, but because really I don't follow that very much at all. Almost everything you see here is to do with the brain, and so I rather feel that's, you know, way in the past. It's almost as far away to me as World War II.
I see.
Almost, not quite.
Yes.
Which also seems pretty remote.
Okay. I'm writing this for the newspaper, which is for the medical students.
Yes.
And if you were going to speak either to people starting off in science, young scientists, young physicians, would you have any pearls accumulated through the
No,
years?
you must have noticed I never do that. That's one of the things I avoid.
All right.
I don't want to advise other people. I don't mind advising people if I know them well, if they have some well-defined dilemma. You know, you think, as indeed I got advice when I was during the war. I worked in the British Admiralty developing weapons, and after the war I didn't know what to do. And whether I should go on, stay working as a civil servant, or whether I should go into research, which essentially I'd hardly done. And I asked a friend of mine, even in this case he was a little bit younger, but a mathematician. And he was very encouraging. He said to me, I don't see why you shouldn't do well. I know lots of people more stupid than you who've done quite well. So with that encouragement. No, I don't think general advice really is much good. It always sounds like a platitude. I think you can help a particular individual if you know something about their character, their background, what they're interested in, and if they're really sort of genuinely puzzled, because sometimes you can look at it from a different point of view and say, why don't you think about it that way? But to advise whole groups of people, you have to have a lot of different outlook and life.
Okay. Okay. You said that you didn't always know you were going to be a scientist.
Oh, I think I always was interested in science. I didn't know it. I wasn't sure after the war whether I'd become a research scientist, as a pure research scientist. Mm-hmm. Another alternative would have been go into industry, do applied work, or go into business or something like that, which has a scientific background, you know, something of that sort. But I guess I always knew it would be something which would use scientific knowledge, and I'd certainly, I suppose I always thought of myself as doing scientific research, but having had this big gap in one's career, you see, I mean, by the time I, let's see, by the time I was making the decision, I was 30, you see. And those years from 24 to, or thereabouts, from essentially the end of one's doctorate to about 30 are often the most productive years, you see.
Yes.
And I'd spent those on making weapons, so turns out it was a good thing to go into a new field, really, because you go into it, even though you haven't had you've missed those years, you go into it with a slightly broader point of view. So I think it was lucky.
Not time wasted
yes.
at all.
Well, probably not. It's difficult to tell, but turned out it was all right.
Speaking of your work with the brain, I was speaking with some sleep researchers over at the VA hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and they mentioned a theory of yours regarding why sleep is necessary, why dreams is necessary, specifically relating to weakening certain lattice work type.
We have a slight problem here, in that, although one can sort of talk in general terms that we've been doing about the visual system, and although yours is not a national newspaper, the rule one tries to observe is that one shouldn't have things in newspapers before they're published in a scientific journal.
Okay.
And in this particular case, it is not yet been published. It will probably be published in Nature. By the time they get it, so it comes out, and it is roughly what you said. And I have been giving a talk, but that's okay. But so I think it's perfectly all right to refer to it in broad terms, but I don't think I could really. Otherwise, Nature gets upset. They won't write much in your case, I know.
Okay, I made passing reference to research in REM sleep.
Yes, that's perfectly all right.
Okay.
That's perfectly all right.
Something struck me as a similarity. It seems sort of a type of lattice theory, and I wondered if you had a particular mindset. You work in X-ray crystallography, studying crystals and lattices, and as this theory was explained to me, it seemed to be sort of a lattice work, strengthening and weakening.
Well, yes, but I don't think it has any relation to X-ray crystallography. It did arise by that drawing up, which has been rubbed out on the right-hand side of the board. It's what's called a neural net. It's supposed to be symbolized not of neurons feeding back on themselves. And it did arise from considering those theoretical models. And of course, that looks a bit like, in some sense, like lattice, but I think it's quite superficial.
Okay.
Yes, I don't think there's any real similarity, and not even in the mathematics used.
Okay.
Which in one case is Fourier transforms and in the other case is matrix algebra. So I don't think it really came from that. But you're right in surmising it did come from the idea originated with a English colleague of mine who said, because we were thinking about theoretical problems, we weren't puzzling about what REM sleep was for. On the contrary, we only thought of that after we got something mathematical. And curiously enough, all that stuff on the board is, although it isn't by me, it's by another young colleague, and it's very doubtful. But anyhow, that equation on the left, and it's got, you see, it says dg by dw equals, and then there's one sigma, and then there's a minus and another sigma. Yes. And the first term is supposed to be how you remember things. It's all mathematical. And that minus term is maybe equivalent to what we were suggesting. So it isn't all as bad as that. And the paper has got no algebra. So it's for the general reader.
Oh, I say it was above or below. Okay.
Yes, no, it's for the general reader.
Okay.
Anyhow, that's a good example. As we were saying right at the beginning, of how one can start on one problem and suddenly find you're in another area.
It seems you took something of a quantum leap from your study of DNA to neural systems. Was there a link?
Well, that was a definite jump. But I must tell you, when I was in the Admiralty and wondering what to do, those were the two alternatives that I was, what we now call molecular biology, what we now called neurobiology. Those were the two alternatives that I decided I would like to go into one or the other.
I see.
And then when I went into molecular biology, I'd always kept an interest in neurobiology and had friends
Oh, I see.
who worked in it and so on.
This was lurking.
So yes, and when I came here, I thought, if I'm going to make the change, then I better make it now. It was rather late in life to make a change, but I wish I had made it a bit earlier, but there you are. It's because there was so much to learn, unfortunately.
Okay. I didn't have any more questions today.
Well, I think you've done fairly well.
Yeah.
Actually,
Shall I kill this?
You have enough for an article.